Chris Brewer.
Why are there still so few women in Parliament?
This is an issue that surfaced yesterday in the House of Commons when Labour's front bench seemed to be entirely made up of women and the Tory front bench seemed to have not one single woman on it. And much was made of this. Tessa Jowell, why are there still so few women in Parliament? I think Labour has 34% of its membership is women.
Absolutely. And
Conservatives about
after
16.
the next election, we hope that that proportion will increase, because my party, the Labour Party, has since 1993-1994 been impatient to increase the number of women. Why is it important? Because that when you look at Parliament, when you are at the receiving end of the laws that, you know, we were talking about rape earlier, that Parliament passes, you can be confident that they're made by a Parliament that is representative of the country, balance between men and women. And, you know, it doesn't happen, and the Liberal Democrats and the Tories have been very critical of us in doing this. It doesn't happen unless you have a period of positive action. We have all-women shortlists, and that's why we have a bigger proportion of women in Parliament than any of the other parties.
These are constituencies where you do not allow men to stand as potential candidates.
Yeah, exactly.
And how many of them are there?
It's
when Jack Broom is involved.
It's half our winnable seats. So
when Jack Broom is involved.
we will almost in every case, I think in every case, replace women who are standing down with all women shortlists, and half our winnable seats will have.
I love the word winnable
seats.
seats. I don't quite know what that means.
Well, it
means predicting the next election results.
Well,
Matthew Hancock.
We live in great hope and strong campaigning.
Matthew Hancock.
Well, I hope that this can change, and I'm a passionate supporter of having more women in Parliament. And
So what's the why? What's the answer to the why there's still so few?
Well, firstly, there's a question of the passage of time. You know, people tend to be in Parliament for a long time, and the Conservative Party went from, I think it was 17 women to 48 women in the last Parliament when we first introduced positive action to get more women into Parliament. And so it does take time. But there's another reason, I think, as well, which is that in the past, the way Parliament has operated, frankly, has been anti-family. It's been designed on a principle of the sort of, you know, a 19th century principle, and the timings with votes at 10:30 in the evening. And one of the things that I was proud to do when I first came into Parliament was campaign amongst MPs to change the sitting hours so that we start earlier in the day and we finish at 7 o'clock. Now, 7 isn't desperately early, but it does help with those who've got families, and it helps with the work-life balance, so you can then go home. And I think that changing the way that Parliament operates to make it more family-friendly will help.
What about the masculine culture? What about
the
the macho masculine culture we see on display every Prime Minister's questions on a Wednesday?
Well,
what about the way that Prime Ministers on both sides conduct their business, and the paucity of cabinet members who are women? I mean, aren't these the factors just as much as the timetable?
I'm not sure that's true on the cabinet ministers. There's the proportion of Conservative cabinet ministers now who are women, 24%, is the same as under Gordon Brown. I wish it were higher, and I imagine that it will be higher. No, I don't want to predict who will be in the cabinet in future, but I wish it were higher. And I think that taking action will take time, but we've got to get there.
All right, the man up there, is that you, sir? No, to the left, and yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, thank you. I think seeing more women in politics would be wonderful, but I don't think having all women shortlists is the way to go about it. I think it's a deeply patronising gesture. I think women should get into politics on their own merit, and they are more than capable of competing with men. You know, we're not going to see all homosexual shortlists, all Asian shortlists. Women should get into Parliament, chosen by their constituents on their own merit.
Alison Wolfe.
I totally agree. I'm deeply against all women shortlists. I mean, of course you can have half and half, male and female, if you have a sort of diktat that they're only allowed to be 50% male, 50% women, female. I don't think that makes it representative. I've never been able to understand why a female who's been to Oxford and then gone straight into politics is any more representative of the country than a male who's been to Oxford and gone straight into politics. So I think that it's an artificial way of doing it, and it doesn't encourage really good women to come forward either. As to why there are so few, I think it is partly time and that things will improve. It's partly, curiously enough, on the Conservative side, a reluctance by the majority female membership often to select females as candidates. I think that will go. I think it will change. I think it's part of a changing culture. I do think that it will always be difficult to get women who are in their 30s and 40s and have children to be active members of Parliament and do the job properly, because the reality is that it's a very demanding job. It's not just about the male culture. I am full of admiration for people who manage to do it, doubly full of people who do manage to do it with children. But I actually think, curiously enough, that one of the best ways to increase the number of women in Parliament would be for us to actually be less ageist in our selections. That if we were more willing in all three parties, to encourage people in their 50s to come forward and to go into Parliament, rather than it being so much now something which is seen as a full-time job. You start to do it when you're 18 and you carry on doing it. I actually think that would do a huge amount for the male-female balance.
Alison, could we persuade you to stand?
No.
The person there, yes, you said.
Just to reiterate the points that have been made earlier,
yeah.
It should be done on the individual's ability to stand as an MP. Yeah. It discriminates against men doing women's shortlists.
All right,
it's the individual.
George Galloway.
Well, I want positive discrimination so we get more working-class people in Parliament. You see, Parliament is full, unfortunately, in all three parties, of public school, young careerists like Matthew. God bless him. I hope he does well. But that's what he is. The Parliament is full of researchers who go from a good school to Oxford University, and you can see them looking at the older members of Parliament walking across the tea room, wondering when they're going to fall over and there might be a by-election and they can get their place. I want to see positive discrimination in favour of better members of Parliament who don't spend their time filling in their expenses forms, who are not filling their pockets at the public's expense with tens of thousands of pounds, charging their dinner, charging their scatter cushions, charging to get their moats cleared out. That's the kind of positive discrimination.
But why are there still so few women?
Well,
that was the question.
We have had women. Margaret Thatcher was a woman, and it didn't make her any good. And Tessa and her friends told us for years in the Labour Party, if only we could get more women into Parliament, there'd be fewer wars, less aggression, and all of that. There was 101 Blair babes elected in 1997, and all but 3 of them voted for every war that Tony Blair took us into. So I'm not big on this.
David Starkey.
Well, I sort of agree with George. I think we need to ask some very hard questions. Why is it so important that there be an even balance between men and women? Why, do we not have a similar quotient for Asians, homosexuals, left-handed people, or whatever? So this is, if we demand that Parliament reflects us, that's a question worth asking. I think the other thing is we've got to ask, what is it that women actually bring? And this question, I think, needs answering, and it needs thinking about. Are we talking about simply social justice? Are we actually saying, as George was hinting, that women are supposed to do it differently? My sense in politics is that successful women are at least as brutal and nasty as the successful men, and Margaret Thatcher is an outstanding example. And the final point is, some of our very worst ministers have been women. No, just let's please let's confront this.
Nobody's stopping you. Just be brief.
We had Estelle Morris, who at least had the merit of realising she couldn't do the job and resigned within a year. It's true, she knew she couldn't do it. And we had Jackie Smith, who, with intensely strong competition, is probably the worst Home Secretary ever, and was, of course, snouting the trough in the largest possible way. So, sorry, women are not a panacea. They don't bring a miracle. They don't do mysterious good. You know, sorry. Can we all start to be adult and think rather than just
And on that note, I'm afraid we have to stop because our hour is up.
I had one more thing I wanted to say.
Well, be very quick.
Which is, David Cameron has had more people for dinner called Michael than he has women. So why don't we start a Twitter campaign nominating women to have dinner with the Prime Minister?
Who are these Michaels? All right. Prizes for the list of Michaels.